The chains around Elena Vasquez's wrists cut deep into her skin as the Zephyrian guards dragged her through the broken streets of New Geneva. Glass crunched under her bare feet from the shattered windows of what used to be the Global Defense Council building. Above her head, the massive alien ships blocked out the sun like metal storm clouds that would never pass. Elena kept her head up as they pulled her along. She had been the commander of Earth's Special Operations Division for 8 years. She had trained soldiers, planned missions, and led humanity's best fighters against impossible odds. She would not give these crystal-skinned monsters the satisfaction of seeing her broken. The Zephyrian ships had appeared 18 months ago without warning. They came from the dark between stars, their hulls gleaming like mirrors that reflected nothing. The aliens inside them were tall and thin, made of what looked like living crystal that sang with strange music. When they spoke, their voices created sounds like wind chimes in a storm. Humanity had fought them with everything they had. Every nation on Earth put aside their differences and sent their armies into space. Pilots flew missions they knew they would not return from. Soldiers charged alien positions with weapons that barely scratched their armor. Engineers worked without sleep to build bigger guns, stronger ships, better defenses. None of it mattered. The Zephyrians had technology that seemed like magic. Their weapons could cut through the strongest human armor like paper. Their shields stopped nuclear weapons without a scratch. Their computers could predict human battle plans before the generals finished making them. But the aliens seemed confused by something. They had expected humans to surrender after losing half their military. Every other species in the galaxy had done exactly that. It was the logical thing to do when facing certain defeat. Humans were not logical. They kept fighting when their fleets were destroyed. They kept fighting when their cities burned. They kept fighting when the odds were 1,000,000 to 1 against them. Elena had been in the final battle above Earth's moon, commanding the last functional human warship as it rammed into a Zephyrian dreadnought. She had lived only because the alien rescue teams pulled her from the wreckage. Now she walked through the ruins of her world as a prisoner. The streets were full of humans wearing strange collars around their necks. The Zephyrians called them bio-collars and said they were a gift of mercy. The collars sent signals into human brains that made them calm and peaceful. No more violence, the aliens said. No more anger or hatred. Just quiet acceptance of their new place in the galaxy. Elena's collar had been removed 3 days ago. The Zephyrians wanted her awake and aware for what came next. They brought her to the center of New Geneva, where the Defense Council building had once stood tall and proud. Now it was a pile of twisted metal and broken concrete. But the aliens had built something new on top of the ruins. A platform made of the same singing crystal as their ships rose from the wreckage like a flower growing from ash. Standing on the platform was the reason Elena was still alive. Harmonarch Kethvar, the supreme commander of the Zephyrian invasion force. He was 3 meters tall and shaped like a human, but made entirely of blue-white crystal. Light moved through his body in patterns that hurt to look at for too long. When he spoke, his voice came from everywhere at once, like music played on an instrument made of starlight. "Commander Elena Vasquez," he said, and her name became a symphony in his alien throat. "You are the one they called the Ghost of Europa Station, the human who destroyed 17 of our ships with only 3 vessels under your command." Elena said nothing. She had learned that silence often told her more about her enemies than words ever could. Kethvar stepped closer. Up close, she could see smaller crystals moving inside his body like fish swimming in a glass bowl. Each one pulsed with its own light. "I have studied your species for many months now," he continued. "You fascinate me. In our records, we have conquered 847 different species across the galaxy. All of them surrendered when defeat became certain. It is the logical response to overwhelming force." He paused, and the crystals in his chest spun faster. "But humans fought until 95% of your military was destroyed. Even now, with your world under our control, some of your people continue to resist. This is not logical behavior." Elena finally spoke. "Logic is overrated." The Harmonarch made a sound like wind through crystal caves. Elena realized he was laughing. "Yes, that is what makes you interesting. You see, Commander, I could have your entire species processed into our labor force. Your people would live as workers on our worlds, building our cities and maintaining our machines. It would be efficient. He gestured to the ruined city around them. But efficiency is not always wisdom. Your species has shown qualities that intrigue us. Your refusal to accept defeat. Even when defeat is certain, your willingness to sacrifice everything for an ideal. These are rare traits in the galaxy. Kethvar moved closer until Elena could see her reflection in his crystal face. I am going to offer you a choice, Elena Vasquez. A choice that no other conquered species has ever received. You may find it interesting. The alien guards lifted Elena to her feet and removed her chains. For the first time in 3 days, she could move her arms freely. She rubbed her wrists where the metal had cut deep and waited. Tomorrow, Kethvar said, you will have the opportunity to save your species from a fate worse than death. All you have to do is sign a document. One simple signature from the famous ghost of Europa Station. Elena looked around at her broken world. Human families huddled in the shadows between buildings, their bio-collars glowing softly in the dim light. Children who would never know freedom played quietly in the ruins. Soldiers who had fought beside her now walked through the streets with empty eyes and calm smiles. What kind of document? She asked. A surrender, Kethvar replied. Complete and final surrender of the human species to the Zephyrian hegemony, but not the kind you might expect. Sign it, and your people will have reservations on 3 continents. You will live under our rule, but you will live. Your children will grow up knowing something of human culture. Your scientists will work alongside ours. Your artists will create beauty that serves the hegemony. The Harmonarch's voice grew softer, almost gentle. Refuse. And I will implement total subjugation protocols. Your people will become drones, working without thought or feeling until they die. Your culture will be erased. Your history will be forgotten. Humanity will exist only as a footnote in our records of conquest. Elena looked up at the alien ships hanging over her world like tombstones. She thought about the billions of humans wearing bio-collars. Their fire and fury dampened to a whisper. She thought about her soldiers who had died fighting for Earth and wondered what they would want her to do. I need time to think, she said. Of course, Kethvar replied. You have until tomorrow morning. Guards will escort you to quarters aboard my flagship. You will be treated with the respect due to a worthy opponent. As the crystal aliens led her away, Elena looked back one more time at the ruins of New Geneva. Somewhere in those shadows, she knew, humans were watching. Humans who still remembered what it felt like to be free. She had 18 hours to decide the fate of her species. The room they gave Elena was bigger than her old apartment in London. Crystal walls curved around her like the inside of a jewel. And soft light came from everywhere at once. There were no windows, but somehow she knew she was high above Earth, on the Zephyrian flagship called the Resonance of Order. A servant brought her food on plates made of metal she did not recognize. The alien looked like Kethvar but smaller, with green crystals instead of blue. It did not speak to her, just set down the tray and left. Elena had not eaten real food in 3 days, only the nutrition paste they fed to prisoners. The meal was human food, bread, meat, vegetables, but it tasted wrong somehow, too perfect, like it had been made in a laboratory. She ate it anyway. She would need her strength. After the meal, Elena explored her prison. The walls were smooth and warm to the touch. When she pressed her hand against them, colors flowed under the surface like oil on water. There was a bed that adjusted itself to her body when she lay down. A bathroom with fixtures that seemed to know what she needed before she asked. It was luxury designed to make her comfortable. That told her something important about her captors. They wanted her to make the right choice. They believed comfort would make her more reasonable. Elena smiled for the first time in days. The Zephyrians thought they understood humans, but they had made their first mistake. The next morning, Kethvar came to see her. He moved into the room without making a sound, his crystal feet somehow silent on the crystal floor. In the light of his own ship, he looked even stranger. The patterns of light in his body were more complex here, like a symphony made visible. "Did you sleep well?" he asked. His voice was softer than it had been on Earth, more musical. "Well enough," Elena replied. She was sitting on the bed with her legs crossed, trying to look relaxed. "Nice ship you have here. The resonance of order is the pride of our fleet," Kethvar said. He seemed pleased that she had noticed. "It has conquered 47 worlds and carried 8 Harmonarchs to victory. Today, it will witness the end of humanity's suffering." Elena nodded slowly. "Before I give you my answer, I want to understand something. Why offer us this choice at all? You could just force us to surrender." Kethvar's crystals pulsed brighter. "An excellent question. You see, Commander, the Zephyrian hegemony has lasted for 10,000 years. We have brought order to a galaxy that was once chaos, war, disease, poverty. We have ended these things on 847 worlds." He began to pace back and forth, his hands clasped behind his back. "But we learned something important during those 10,000 years. Willing cooperation is always more valuable than forced compliance. Species that choose to join us willingly become partners. Those that resist until the end become slaves." Elena watched him carefully. There was something in the way he moved, the way he spoke, that reminded her of the professors she had known in military school. Kethvar genuinely believed he was teaching her something important. "What happened to the species that resisted?" she asked. "They exist," Kethvar replied. "But they do not live. They work in our factories and mines, but they feel nothing. Think nothing beyond their tasks. It is efficient, but it is also wasteful. The creativity that makes each species unique is lost forever." He stopped pacing and looked directly at her. "I do not want this to happen to humanity. Your species has shown remarkable qualities. The way you fought against impossible odds, the way you adapted to every weapon we used against you, the way you never stopped believing you could win, even when victory was mathematically impossible." Elena felt a chill run down her spine. "You studied us during the war. Of course we did. Every battle, every tactic, every desperate last stand. We recorded it all." Kethvar's voice became almost excited. "Do you know what we discovered? Humans are the only species we have encountered that becomes more dangerous when cornered. Every other species becomes predictable when facing extinction. They try to preserve what they can. But humans burn everything rather than let their enemies have it." Elena remembered the final days of the war. Human commanders destroying their own bases, rather than let them fall into alien hands. Pilots ramming their fighters into Zephyrian ships when their weapons ran out of power. Soldiers fighting with broken weapons and sheer determination, long after any reasonable hope of victory was gone. "That scares you," she said. "It fascinates us," Kethvar corrected. "Fear is illogical. Fascination leads to understanding, and understanding leads to wisdom. Arkara." He moved closer to her bed and sat down on a chair that formed itself out of the crystal floor. "I have a confession to make, Elena Vasquez. The choice I offered you yesterday is not entirely altruistic. Yes, I could process your entire species into our labor force, but I suspect the result would be disappointing." Elena raised an eyebrow. "Disappointing how? Humans without their fire are not really humans at all, are they? They would be efficient workers. But we have efficient workers on 1,000 worlds. What we do not have is a species that thinks the way you think, that sees possibilities where others see only obstacles." Kethvar leaned forward. The light patterns in his body shifted to something that might have been eagerness. "Imagine what humanity could accomplish with access to hegemony technology. Your engineers working with our resources, your soldiers training with our weapons, your artists creating with materials that do not exist on your world. Under your control," Elena said. "Under our guidance," he corrected. "The same way a teacher guides a student. You would learn. You would grow. And eventually, you would take your place as a junior partner in the greatest civilization the galaxy has ever known." Elena was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was carefully neutral. "And if I refuse to sign your surrender document?" Then I will do what the hegemony has always done to species that choose extinction over cooperation. Your people will be fitted with neural processors that eliminate their capacity for independent thought. They will live, but they will not be human. Their children will be born with the processors already in place. Within 3 generations, humanity as a thinking species will cease to exist. Elena felt her hands clench into fists. She forced herself to relax. How long do I have to decide? The ceremony is scheduled for this afternoon. Representatives from 12 member species will attend to witness humanity's integration into the hegemony. It will be broadcast across the galaxy as an example of enlightened conquest. Kethvar stood up, and his chair dissolved back into the floor. I hope you will make the wise choice, Elena Vasquez. Your species has impressed us. It would be a tragedy to waste such potential. After he left, Elena lay back on the bed and stared at the curved ceiling above her. Colors flowed across its surface like aurora in a polar sky. She thought about the billions of humans on Earth below, waiting to learn their fate. She thought about the soldiers who had died believing they were protecting something worth protecting. And she thought about the small device hidden in the seam of her prison clothes, a device her people had smuggled aboard this ship in ways the Zephyrians could never imagine. The aliens were right about one thing. Humans were different from every other species they had conquered. But they had missed the most important difference of all. Humans were very, very good at lying. Elena closed her eyes and began to plan how she was going to kill Harmonarch Kethvar. Elena had never worn clothes like these before. The Zephyrian ceremonial robes were made from fabric that seemed to be woven from light itself. It changed colors when she moved, shifting from deep blue to silver to gold. The aliens had brought human stylists aboard the ship to prepare her for the ceremony. They worked in silence, their bio-collars glowing softly as they brushed her hair and painted her face. She watched herself in the mirror as they worked. Elena Vasquez, the ghost of Europa Station, was being dressed like a bride for her own species' funeral. The stylists stepped back when they were finished. Elena looked like a queen from an ancient story, beautiful and terrible and doomed. The irony was perfect. She would look magnificent when she destroyed everything. 2 Zephyrian guards came to escort her to the ceremony. They were taller than Kethvar, with armor made from red crystal that hummed with contained energy. Their weapons could turn a human into ash in less than a second. Elena smiled at them as they flanked her in the hallway. The ship's corridors were filled with activity. Alien servants rushed past carrying decorations and equipment. She caught glimpses of creatures she had never seen before through open doorways. Some looked like walking trees made of metal. Others were pools of liquid that somehow held their shape. The Zephyrian hegemony ruled over species that defied her imagination. They brought her to the grand resonance chamber at the heart of the ship. Elena had to stop and stare when the doors opened. The room was bigger than a football stadium, with a domed ceiling that seemed to stretch up into infinity. Crystal formations grew from the floor and walls like a forest made of frozen music. Light flowed through them in patterns that made her think of rivers and storms and the beating of a cosmic heart. At the center of the chamber stood a platform made from black stone that reflected no light at all. On the platform was a simple wooden table and chair, the only human-made objects in the vast alien space. The contrast was jarring and deliberate. Humanity reduced to furniture in the middle of galactic civilization. The chamber was filling with beings Elena had only seen in intelligence reports. Representatives from a dozen different species stood on floating platforms around the room's perimeter. Some attended in person. Others appeared as holographic projections that flickered with static. They all had one thing in common. They were here to watch humanity's final surrender. Elena recognized a few of them from the war. The Thrakari, with their insect bodies and clicking mandibles, had provided raw materials for the Zephyrian fleets. The Kelani, who looked like jellyfish made of crystal, had used their telepathic abilities to intercept human communications. The Barathi, massive creatures covered in thick armor plating, had served as shock troops in the ground battles. All of them had once been independent species with their own worlds and cultures. Now they were parts of the hegemony machine, and they were here to welcome humanity into the same fate. Kethvar stood near the center platform, wearing robes that made Elena's look simple by comparison. His crystal body was draped in what looked like liquid starlight, and a crown of pure energy floated above his head. He was the master of ceremonies for his greatest victory. Other Zephyrians filled the chamber. Nobles and officials and military commanders who wanted to witness this historic moment. Elena counted at least 200 of them, their crystal bodies creating a symphony of light that hurt to look at directly. Recording devices hovered throughout the chamber like metal insects. The ceremony would be broadcast to every world in hegemony space. Trillions of beings would watch Elena sign away humanity's freedom. Commander Vasquez, Kethvar's voice echoed from every crystal surface in the room. Welcome to the ceremony of integration. Today, your species takes its first step toward a glorious future as part of the eternal harmony. Elena walked slowly toward the platform. Her bare feet made no sound on the crystal floor. The assembled aliens watched her every move, waiting for her to break down or beg or show some sign of the defeat they all expected. She disappointed them. Elena kept her head high and her back straight as she climbed the steps to the platform. She had commanded fleets and led armies. She had stared death in the face 100 times and never flinched. She would not start now. On the wooden table was the surrender document, written on real paper from Earth. Another gesture of respect from her captors. The words were simple and clear. We, the people of Earth, surrender unconditionally to the Zephyrian hegemony and accept our place as subjects of the eternal harmony. Below the text was a line for her signature. Kethvar approached the platform and began to speak. His words were translated by hidden devices into a dozen different languages for the alien representatives. Citizens of the hegemony, he said, today we witness the end of the last great war of conquest. The species known as humans has fought with courage and determination, but they have learned the wisdom of accepting inevitable defeat. Elena listened to his speech with half her attention. The other half was focused on what she had hidden in the folds of her ceremonial robes. The Resistance had spent months planning this moment. Getting the weapon aboard the ship had required sacrifices she tried not to think about. The human species will be granted autonomous territory on 3 continents of their homeworld, Kethvar continued. They will be allowed to maintain their cultural practices and educational systems under hegemony supervision. Their children will grow up learning both human history and galactic law. Murmurs of approval came from the alien audience. This was unusually generous treatment for a conquered species. The Zephyrians were showing mercy that would be remembered and celebrated throughout the galaxy. In exchange, Kethvar said, humanity will provide labor and resources to support hegemony expansion. Their military will be disbanded and their weapons destroyed. They will live in peace under the protection of the eternal harmony. He turned to Elena, who was standing beside the table with her hands folded. Commander Elena Vasquez, as the last-ranking military officer of Earth's defense forces, you have the authority to sign this document on behalf of your species. Do you understand the terms that have been offered? I understand, Elena replied. Her voice carried clearly through the vast chamber. Kethvar reached into his robes and produced a writing instrument. It looked like an antique fountain pen from Earth, but Elena could see the faint glow of alien technology in its metal surface. Another gesture of cultural respect from beings who thought they understood human psychology. Then please, the Harmonarch said, offering her the pen. End your species' suffering and begin their future. Elena took the pen from his crystalline hand. It was heavier than it looked, and warm to the touch. Around the chamber, recording devices focused on her face. Alien representatives leaned forward on their platforms. The assembled Zephyrian nobles hummed with harmonics that expressed satisfaction and anticipation. Elena looked down at the surrender document. The words seemed to swim on the page in front of her eyes. With her signature, humanity would become a client species of the Zephyrian hegemony. They would live, but they would never be free. She thought about the soldiers who had died believing they were protecting something worth protecting. She thought about the children on Earth wearing bio-collars that stole their anger and their hope. She thought about the billions of humans who were counting on her to save them, even if they didn't know it yet. Elena picked up the pen and held it over the signature line. The chamber fell silent, except for the soft harmonic humming of the crystal formations. Every being in the room was holding their breath, waiting for the moment when humanity finally accepted defeat. "Before I sign," Elena said, looking up at Kethvar, "I have one modification to propose." The Harmonarch tilted his head, genuinely curious. In 10,000 years of conquest, no species had ever requested changes to a surrender document at the signing ceremony. "What modification?" he asked. Elena smiled. "This," Elena said, and drove the pen straight into the junction where Kethvar's neck crystal met his cranial housing. For a moment, nobody moved. The Harmonarch stood frozen, staring down at the human woman who had just stabbed him with what should have been a ceremonial writing instrument. His optical organs went wide with something that might have been surprise or confusion or the alien equivalent of disbelief. Then his harmonic voice became a scream that shattered crystal formations throughout the chamber. Elena had spent 3 days studying Zephyrian anatomy while pretending to consider their offer. She had learned that the junction between their neck and head crystals was where they processed harmonic frequencies. It was their most vulnerable spot, but only if you knew exactly where to strike and had something sharp enough to pierce their living crystal structure. The pen was not really a pen. It was a focused plasma cutter disguised as a human writing instrument. Built by resistance engineers who had died getting it aboard this ship, it cut through Kethvar's crystal structure like a laser through ice. The Harmonarch's death scream created a feedback loop that raced through every crystal formation in the ship. Emergency lights flickered as power systems went haywire. The floating platforms holding alien representatives began to shake and spin out of control. Several crashed to the chamber floor in explosions of sparks and broken metal. Elena was already moving before Kethvar hit the ground. She pulled a small device from her robes and activated it with her thumb. The signal beacon was no bigger than a coin, but it broadcast on frequencies that would reach every hidden resistance cell on Earth below. The message was simple: Spartacus Protocol, execute now. The Zephyrian guards were fast, but Elena had been expecting them. She rolled off the platform as energy beams cut through the air where she had been standing. The wooden table exploded into splinters. The surrender document burst into flames. Elena landed hard on the crystal floor and kept rolling. More energy beams tracked her movement, leaving glowing scorch marks on the chamber walls. She came up running, dodging between panicking alien representatives as their platforms spun out of control. A Thrakari delegate's platform crashed near her feet, throwing sparks and metal fragments in every direction. Elena vaulted over the wreckage and kept moving. Behind her, she could hear the harmonic voices of Zephyrian nobles raised in alarm and anger. The death of their Harmonarch had thrown them into chaos. She made it halfway across the chamber before the first energy beam found her. The blast hit her in the left shoulder and spun her around. Elena hit the crystal wall hard, leaving a smear of blood on its glowing surface. Pain shot down her arm and she smelled burning flesh. But she forced herself to keep moving. 2 more guards were closing in from her right, their weapons charged with a high-pitched whine that she felt in her bones. Elena grabbed a piece of wreckage from a fallen platform and threw it at the nearest guard. It struck his crystal armor and shattered harmlessly. But it gave her the second she needed to change direction. She ran toward a cluster of Zephyrian nobles who were trying to flee the chamber through a side exit. They scattered as she approached, their crystal bodies chiming against each other in their panic. Elena pushed through them and made it to the doorway before the next energy beam caught her. This one hit her in the back and sent her sprawling across the threshold. Elena tasted blood in her mouth and knew she was dying. Her legs would not work anymore, and dark spots danced at the edges of her vision. But it didn't matter. The signal had been sent. Above Earth, hidden systems throughout the planet began to activate. The biocollars that the Zephyrians used to keep humans calm and peaceful had a fatal flaw that their creators never suspected. Human resistance engineers had found a way to reverse their function, turning devices designed to suppress aggression into combat stimulants that flooded the wearer's system with adrenaline and endorphins. In the ruins of New York, a grandmother named Sarah Chen felt her collar warm against her neck. For 3 months, she had walked through the streets with empty eyes and a peaceful smile, her natural anger and determination muted to whispers. Now that anger came flooding back like a dam bursting, and she remembered where she had hidden the explosives her grandson had died smuggling into the city. In London, A former SAS sergeant named James Morrison felt the fog lift from his mind as his collar overloaded. He looked around at the Zephyrian patrol that was walking past him and remembered that he had been a soldier before he had been a slave. The knife hidden in his sleeve felt good in his hand. In Tokyo, in Moscow, in Cairo, and Sydney and Mexico City, humans who had spent months living as docile prisoners suddenly remembered what it felt like to be human, and they remembered that Elena Vasquez had told them to wait for her signal. The resistance she had spent years building during the war erupted into coordinated action across the globe. Weapons that had been hidden in sewers and buried in forests were dug up by hands that remembered how to use them. Zephyrian supply depots that had seemed secure exploded in the night. Communication towers that connected the occupation forces to their fleets above fell silent as human saboteurs cut their power lines. But the humans were not trying to win. Elena had taught them better than that. They were trying to make Earth too expensive to hold. Every Zephyrian killed would be replaced by 2 more from the fleet above. But each replacement cost resources, time, and political will. Every supply convoy attacked forced the aliens to send more guards. Every communication tower destroyed made their occupation less efficient. Every act of defiance reminded the galaxy that humanity was not broken. The Zephyrians had conquered hundreds of worlds, but they had never faced an enemy that grew stronger with each defeat. On the flagship above, Elena lay bleeding on the crystal floor as alien guards surrounded her. Her vision was fading, but she could hear the confusion in their harmonic voices. Emergency alarms were sounding throughout the ship as Kethvar's death disrupted computer systems that had been linked to his biological signature. One of the guards knelt beside her and spoke in accented English. "Why?" he asked. "Your species could have lived. Now we will destroy them all." Elena coughed up blood and smiled. "You still don't understand," she whispered. "You can't destroy us. You can only make us more dangerous." The guard raised his weapon to finish her, but Elena was already gone. Her last thought was of the children on Earth below, taking off their bio-collars and learning how to be angry again. Within hours, reports began flooding in from across the planet. Human resistance cells were attacking Zephyrian positions with weapons and tactics the occupation forces had never seen before. These were not the desperate last stands of a defeated army. These were coordinated strikes by a population that had been preparing for this moment since the day they surrendered. The Zephyrians discovered that humans had been hiding in plain sight for months, pretending to be broken, while secretly building the deadliest insurgency in galactic history. Elena Vasquez had given them a pen to sign surrender. She had used it to declare war. 6 months after Elena Vasquez died on the crystal floors of the Resonance of Order, Junior Harmonarch Velthas stood in the ruins of what had once been a Zephyrian supply depot outside Mumbai. The twisted metal and broken crystal told a story that defied everything the hegemony thought they knew about conquest and occupation. The humans had used stolen Zephyrian explosives to destroy their own infrastructure, not to deny it to the occupiers, but to make the occupation too expensive to maintain. The depot had contained enough supplies to feed a city for a month. Now it was radioactive slag that would cost more to clean up than to simply abandon. Velthas picked his way through the wreckage, his scanner recording the damage for his report. This was the 14th major supply depot destroyed in the past week alone. The humans were not trying to drive the Zephyrians away with military force. They were making Earth cost more to hold than it was worth. His communication crystal chimed with an urgent message. Another patrol had gone missing in the Amazon basin. That made 37 lost patrols this month. The humans would take their weapons and equipment, study them, and use that knowledge to plan more effective attacks. Every Zephyrian killed taught their enemies how to kill more efficiently. This was not how occupation was supposed to work. Velthas had studied the histories of all 847 previous conquests. Species that surrendered quickly became productive members of the hegemony. Species that resisted to the bitter end were processed into mindless labor forces. But humans had created a third option that no one had imagined. Surrender, and then fight anyway. The bio-collars had been useless after the first day. Whatever the humans had done to reverse their function, it had spread like a virus through their population. Now wearing the devices actually made humans more aggressive, not less. The occupation forces had stopped trying to use them after losing 3 entire platoons to supposedly pacified civilians. Vel'Thas walked to the edge of the destruction and looked out over the sprawling human city beyond. Mumbai had a population of 20 million before the invasion. Now it had 30 million, as refugees from other cities had crowded into its slums and towers. The Zephyrians had expected the overcrowding to make the population easier to control. Instead, it had made them impossible to track. Every human in the city could be a resistance fighter. The old man selling fruit on the corner might be passing coded messages to his customers. The children playing in the streets might be scouts for sabotage teams. The woman cleaning offices in Zephyrian administrative buildings might be planting listening devices and stealing security codes. The humans had turned their entire planet into a weapon pointed at their occupiers. Vel'Thas's scanner beeped as it detected movement in the ruins behind him. He spun around, energy weapon drawn, but saw only empty shadows between twisted metal beams. His harmonic senses picked up nothing but the ambient noise of a dead facility, but he knew they were watching him. They were always watching. The humans had learned to hide from sensors that could detect heartbeats from a kilometer away. They had learned to move without making sounds that crystal-sensitive hearing could pick up. They had learned to fight creatures with technology centuries ahead of their own, and they were winning. Not winning battles. The Zephyrians still controlled the major cities and transportation networks. Their fleets still commanded the space around Earth. Their forces could destroy any human army that dared to face them in open combat. But the humans were winning the war anyway. Every day of occupation cost the hegemony more resources than Earth could ever provide. Every month brought new reports of missing patrols, destroyed facilities, and sabotaged equipment. The human resistance was like a cancer eating away at Zephyrian efficiency from the inside. Vel'Thas made his way back to his transport, a sleek vehicle that could cross continents in minutes. As he flew toward the command ship hanging above the Indian Ocean, he thought about the report he would have to write for the Council of Harmonarchs. The humans had done something unprecedented in galactic history. They had made themselves ungovernable. Other conquered species throughout hegemony space were beginning to take notice. The Kalani had experienced their first rebellion in 400 years just last month. The Barathi had started asking questions about their place in the galactic order. Even species that had been cooperative members for millennia were showing signs of unrest. Word of Elena Vasquez's last stand was spreading through underground networks that the hegemony had never known existed. The story grew in the telling. The human commander who used a surrender ceremony to kill the alien leader. The warrior who chose death over submission and triggered a planet-wide uprising with her final breath. The hegemony's information ministry tried to suppress the story, but it spread anyway. Resistance cells on dozens of worlds began calling themselves Ghost Divisions, after Elena's old nickname. Sabotage operations were carried out with pens as their symbol, marking the sites of attacks with crude drawings of the instrument she had used to kill Harmonarch Kethvar. 6 months later, the Council of Harmonarchs made a decision that had never been made before in the 10,000-year history of their civilization. They voted to withdraw from a successfully conquered world. The costs of occupation had exceeded the benefits by a factor of 12 to 1. The political damage of the continuing insurgency was spreading to other worlds. Most importantly, the humans had proven that the hegemony's model of conquest was not universal. There were species that could not be broken, only contained. Earth was classified as a paradox species and quarantined. No Zephyrian ships would approach the Sol system. No contact would be made with human representatives. The universe's newest military doctrine was born. Some victories cost more than defeats. The withdrawal took 3 months. As the last Zephyrian transport lifted off from Earth's surface, human crowds gathered to watch them go. They did not cheer or celebrate. They simply stood in silence, knowing they had paid a terrible price for their freedom. Elena Vasquez's body had been returned to Earth, along with the ashes of every other human who died fighting the occupation. She was buried in a simple grave in Arlington National Cemetery, next to the soldiers who had died in the great space battles above Earth's moon. Her headstone bore no fancy words or elaborate decorations. Just her name, her rank, and a single line that became humanity's new motto. She made us dangerous. Years later, When human exploration ships began venturing beyond their solar system again, they found a galaxy that had changed. Species that had served the hegemony for centuries were beginning to remember what independence felt like. Resistance movements that called themselves human-inspired were spreading across worlds that had forgotten how to fight. The Zephyrians still controlled most of the galaxy, but their expansion had stopped. For the first time in their history, they faced the possibility that their empire might actually shrink. The concept was so alien to their thinking that they had no word for it in their harmonic language. Elena Vasquez never lived to see humanity free. She died believing she was buying time for her people to find another way, perhaps in some distant future when the balance of power might shift. But she had done something more important than winning freedom for one world. She had proven that the hegemony could be resisted. She had shown the galaxy that there were worse things than death, and better things than survival. She had made humanity dangerous, and in a universe where the strong ruled the weak through fear and overwhelming force, being dangerous was the only real freedom there was. The pen she had used to kill Kethvar was recovered from the wreckage of his flagship and put on display in the Smithsonian Museum in Washington, D.C. Children who had never known occupation would stop and stare at the simple metal instrument behind its protective glass. Their teachers would tell them the story of the woman who used a pen to change the galaxy. How she turned a moment of surrender into an act of rebellion that echoed across the stars. How she proved that humans might lose battles, but they would never stop fighting. The plaque beneath the display case bore Elena's last words to her alien captors. "You can't destroy us. You can only make us more dangerous." The galaxy had learned that lesson well, and they would never forget the price of underestimating the species from a small blue world that refused to stay conquered.